Copyright University of Auckland, all rights reserved. The content and delivery of lectures in this course are protected by copyright. Material belonging to others may have been used in these lectures and copied by and solely for the educational purposes of the university under licence. You may record the lectures for the purposes of private study or research, but you may not sell, alter or further reproduce or distribute any part of these lectures to any other person. Failure to comply with the terms of this warning may expose you to legal action for copyright infringement by the copyright owner and/or disciplinary action by the university.
Kia ora everyone, and welcome to the very first of our Fast Forward series this semester. So Fast Forward is a series of talks that we run each semester, and for longer than I've been here, I think, Jim from the brand from Winston Wallboards have been supporting us, and will continue to support us next year as well, which is terrific. So thanks very much for that. Now this particular one in semester 2 focuses on the theme doing medium density well. So whether you like it or not, whatever your views are on it, Auckland has decided to grow up. It's through the unitary plan, Auckland is intensifying. It is getting denser. So what we need to do is we need to do that well. If we make a mess of this, it'll be leaky buildings all over again. So the focus of this series is, again, doing medium density well. And if you came along to them last year, you will have noticed that this year we're getting into the nitty-gritty a little bit more. So I'll introduce Pamela shortly, but we have had a change of government since the last one. So one of our star speakers will be Phil Piper, who's of course the Minister of Housing, Minister of Transport, and he'll be a little bit later on. We'll be focusing next week on co-op housing. And we had James, what was James' surname? So the Nightingale, James Legg, from Melbourne last year, and he was talking about Nightingale and that concept for co-op housing over there. Next week, we've got two groups of people who are trying to do it in Auckland. So we're getting more into the nitty-gritty of how things work. Also in this series, and I don't know if our sponsors entirely know, but we're spending some of their money on drinks and nibbles afterwards. So after the discussion on what should happen on the Unitech site that the government has purchased recently and will be putting housing on, there'll be the opportunity to talk to the speakers and talk to other people there as well. And after Phil Piper's talk, there'll be the opportunity again to have conversations with people. And then later on in Architecture Week, we've got some award-winning designers who are coming in and talking about the award-winning designs that they did. And there'll be the opportunity to get together and have a discussion as well. Because we're really keen that this series is not just one person or a panel discussion talking to you and a few questions afterwards, that we can really start to get a proper conversation going about all of this. So hopefully you'll come along to a whole lot of others in this series. So tonight I'd like to introduce Pamela Bell from PrefabNZ. And Pamela is a graduate from the School of Architecture at Victoria University of Wellington. And her thesis, her MA Croft thesis work was on prefabricated housing. She then, with her supervisor and our colleague Mark Southcombe, produced the book, the book on prefabrication, which is sold out. But here's a tip. There is a website that I use constantly called ABE-Books, A-B-E Books. It's an online second-hand bookshop that's global. You jump onto ABE-Books, you look up the author or the title, you will find that book. It might be in New Jersey or somewhere like that. but you'll find them. And they're quite cheap as well. And then after the book, Pamela founded PrefabNZ. So she's the CEO there now, and PrefabNZ's been going for about 8.5 years, I think, hasn't it, Pamela? But now the time has come. And this government is very serious about dealing with housing, and it's very serious about using prefabrication as a way to deal with that issue. So, if I can get her off her mobile.
I'm trying to find a book.
All right. I'll do it for you. It's my job. All right, so here's Pamela, and Pamela will talk for a while, and then we'll have the opportunity for questions after that. So please welcome Pamela.
Thanks, Bill. While this is being set up, some of you have got a little puzzle house, so that's just to amuse you and keep your hands busy. And if you've got kiddies and things at home, come up and grab a few more afterwards on your way out. Cool, so thanks for the introduction. I'm really happy to keep this as a conversation, so if you want to raise your hand or object or add a comment or a question at any point, please do that. So, start off, kia ora koutou, thanks for coming out this evening. It is a beautiful evening. I appreciate that you've come inside to spend some time with us together. I do start with, my version of a fishing photo, which is, I used to do something before prefabricated housing, which was called snowboarding, and I guess what was interesting about that is it was about spotting the gaps. And for those of you that snowboard, if you're riding between the trees, you've got to spot the gap, right? So I guess that's the really interesting thing with prefabrication, is it's still a bit of an opportunity, a gap in our market. So just so I know who's in the room, how many people here are in the design and construction industry? Almost everyone. Who's not in the design and construction industry? Who's a member of the public, just interested? Fabulous, welcome. Thanks for being brave and coming in. So many of you will be familiar with some of this material, but hopefully there's a couple of new nuggets in there. And again, of course, there'll be your questions. So PrefabNZ, like Bill told us, has been around for 8.5 years. There is a front page or a website. Pretty much everything we do can be found there. So if you can't find something, you just get in touch, info@prefabnz.com, and of course we answer your queries. Give us a few days. So we're up to about nearly 330 members. Is anyone in the room a member? Thank you very much. That's what keeps us alive. So our members, and these stats are a couple of years old, but they're still reflective, roughly a third specifiers, designers, architects, quantity surveyors, engineers, a third makers, manufacturers, builders, and a third other building professionals, building officials, research. So we have free student membership, so get on board. And we're also spread, roughly throughout the country, so we're not just entirely in Auckland, Wellington, South Island, pretty equally. And like all industry associations, we stay alive through not only our membership, but good people like Jib, who are our partners, and they help us deliver our suite of newsletters and websites and events. Basically, information, education, advocacy is the kind of work that we do. So I've just got a video here. This is from our collab. We run an annual conference, which we call the collab. Was anyone at our one in March this year? It was just down the road at AUT. Excellent. Thanks for coming, Tommy. It was a good event. So here's a little snippet of what happens there.
Prefabrication and modular construction can help to alleviate the capacity constraints that our sector and construction is facing.
And we're talking about lots of automation. We're talking about artificial intelligence, edge devices, cloud computing.
Thinking about how we can transform how we build in New Zealand.
We are able to deliver building faster, safer, at higher quality, and friendlier to the environment.
3D printing, we want to get it out of little plastic objects into real buildings, and that's probably going to happen.
If you want to be part of this, work with us.
We're losing more people every year through retirement than we are gaining through new entrants coming into our industry.
And we've said, let's just talk about digital fabrication, because some of this is real and we can exploit it today.
Yeah, if you don't prefab, you're a moron.
I thank you again for the work that you do in your industry, in your firms, in your workplaces, and the work that Prefab New Zealand does on this incredibly important task. Thank you.
Cool, so that's our little highlights video, and we've got a bunch of our own videos plus our members' videos on our YouTube channel, so have a look there sometime when you've got some time to burn. I should mention also in the video that wonderful tidbit about if you don't prefab, you're a moron. That's James Murray Parks from Brookfield Solutions. He's an absolute brilliant mathematical savant, so really interesting guy. What you would have noticed also is that there were a lot of shots of timber. We are material agnostic, timber, steel, concrete, but there is a huge amount of interesting stuff happening in timber, and I'll show you some things in a minute. The other thing you would have noticed is that we have a really equitable balance of women and men presenting at our conference, and in the construction industry that's really rare because the visibility of women is about 1 in 8 or 12.5%, so it's pretty low. So we're trying to do our bit to help move that up the ranks. Cool. So about 2 years ago I did a little TEDx talk, and in the vein of Amy Colker Marks, made people stand up and swear an oath that prefab is not a dirty word. And the reason we do that, of course, is because there are some historical misperceptions, which we'll dig into in a minute. But essentially when we say prefab or prefabrication or offsite construction or OSM, offsite manufacture, or manufactured buildings or industrialised buildings or innovative construction, we're all talking about the same thing. It's just making something away from the construction site. And I think this perler might have come from you, Dave. It's about designing in large chunks, getting greater profitability at scale, certifying with certainty, because we need the building officials on this journey, or else it's a pretty lonely, slow one, isn't it? And of course, because we want to build faster. So the way that this looks like in New Zealand is broadly 5 typologies. And we're doing pre-nail components, and we're doing complete buildings, and we have been doing those for about 50, 60 years. What we need to do more of are the pods and panels in the middle. We have a bunch of information on our website, which is all, well, one-page infographics. We think if you can't say it in one page in drawings, it's not really worth saying. So feel free to download that kind of stuff, or else we've got it up here. But when we talk about the reasons for using prefabrication, we talk about primarily improved quality. So as soon as you take something off-site into a controlled yard or a controlled environment, it's about controlling the outcome. It's about tighter tolerances, and if you've got tighter tolerances in a better fit house, then you're going to have lower heat leakage and you're going to have reduced running costs. So this is the ideal scenario. The second one, of course, is time savings. There can be quite large time savings. Statistics are about 60% of on-site time can be saved. And they say the fastest way to save money is by saving time. So although people want that cost saving up front, it is buried down beneath the quality and the time savings and other qualitative savings, to be fair. It's quite hard to measure some of these things, and we're trying to work with quantity surveyors around this, around life cycle costing, and how do you put a number against, well, saving people's lives when they fall off the end of a roof jig at grade rather than at height. I mean, how do you put numbers around reduced noise and disruption and transport and dust at site? So if you live in a large housing development and it's a staged development, you would prefer that the construction next door to your bedroom window happen faster and less intrusively. So in some cases it's worth looking at prefabricated solutions for those situations. Construction has this unenviable record that I'm sure you're aware of being a really low productivity industry. So manufacture, agriculture even, all beat us. So we are very low. So there was a report a few years ago from PwC that looked at if we could improve our productivity by 10%, then that would improve GDP by 1%. And lots of eyes lit up around that. So that's certainly an area that has gained the attention of the ministerial officials, for example. But really why we're here today and why we're looking at this medium density umbrella, if you like, is because we have this specific challenge of needing to house our people. This is a global challenge, it's not a localised one, it's an urban challenge. We'll have 7 billion more urban dwellers by mid-century. Some smart persons worked out that that works out to about 10 or 30 million more apartment buildings. I don't know quite what size, but anyway, it's a massive number of buildings. The specific opportunity, of course, that we have here in New Zealand comes under the Kiwi Build banner, and Bill has mentioned that you'll have Minister Twyford as a speaker, and that'll be a fantastic event. Of course, this is a really interesting time for anyone who's interested in joined up and integrated solutions, and we're starting to hear about how 1 million trees works with regional economic development funding, which then works with 100,000 affordable quality homes. And of course, MB has a great website about that, and we're collating a bit of off-site prefab specific information on our website too. So dip into that. So how are we going to deliver 100,000 homes over 10 years? Well, clearly not in our traditional way, which has looked something like this. So we're going to have to think of a new way to do it. So what can we learn from what we've done before? Because believe it or not, we have gone down this road before. There are some mistakes we've made, but there are also some great lessons we can learn. So who went to school in one of these? Lucky us, huh? So whenever we say prefab, this is what our mind reverts to. In the UK, when you say prefab, you revert to this kind of mid-1950s, post-World War II, light temporary dwelling. So the historical illusion is with temporary. We have some fonder memories, of course, which are around pattern book housing and pre-cut or component-based housing. So the railway housing program was a precursor to the state housing program, one of the first ones where we started bundling land with loans and kit set or pattern book type housing. So all the North Island railway houses were made out of a factory in Frankton in the Waikato, and there were over 1,600 of these kit sets made. So the ones in the South Island were made at site. So although they might lack a bit of insulation, they've still got a wonderful, endearing look. And of course, the pattern book approach was also applied to villas and bungalows and these types of houses that we now revere and are sought after. This is one of my favourites from history. So in the 1970s, Finnish architect Matti Surinen's design for the Futuro was made in New Zealand under licence. In the 1970s, the Commonwealth Games in Christchurch had a BNZ bank branch that was housed in one of these. And 12 of the remaining 60 in the world are located in New Zealand. Has anyone seen one of these? Yeah, cool. So they're often in seaside locations, Raglan, outside Nelson, Taka, I think it is. And there's one in the King's Removal Yard in Christchurch. When you land at the airport there, you can see it as you're landing. I particularly like their medium density housing solution, the old plug and play pod scenario. So, you know, anything's possible, really. So clearly we have a rich history in prefabrication, and it goes right back to the Treaty House, and even before that we like to track it right back to pre-colonial bundling raupo at the side of the wetland. So we've got a couple of 100 years to draw on. But as for today, here's a quick little bit of eye candy about what members are up to today. And some of these might be familiar. So I'll just go through the component, panel, pod and complete building. So the good folks from Strawn Group Architects, have you got a crew here today?
Yeah, there's a few.
There's a few? Excellent. So this is a great example of a custom one-off component-based prefabricated dwelling. And so you've got the pre-cut steel, the precast concrete, and I'm sure there's other members, and Dave can tell you all about it afterwards. And of course, a really good lesson here is prefabrication is not a repeatable design. This is an award-winning one-off custom design. Of course, 95% of houses start with pre-nailed roof trusses and wall frames. At some point, this was thought of as a wacky idea. So the really nice thing is that we can now see how small incremental change can take place. And then there are the odd wacky ideas. So has anyone been to the Mount Pleasant Community Centre? Claire, I hope you have. So this is a really beautiful building and it is available as a community centre, as a venue to hire. And this is made out of LVL from Nelson Pine. And that was put together by Lee's Construction, I think. And one of our board members, Chris Moller, who fronts the Grand Designs Show, was a key design architect in that project. Has anyone seen that Grand Designs Show? Excellent. So that is a really good vehicle to beam innovative construction into people's living rooms or wherever you choose to watch it. Cool. So moving up the scale, panels. Now this is where I think we've got a lot of really exciting things happening. And what you've got here is a little glimpse at the Concision factory in Christchurch. And this uses a mechanised manufacturing approach for panels, which is used quite a lot in other countries. In Germany and Japan and other countries like that, 10 or 15% of all housing is made using these methods. This is basically 3604 in a factory. So these panels are made on flatbeds. They use butterfly tables to flip them over to do the other side. The windows, the smart fit windows are put in when they're hanging, and then they go to site in these vertical racks. And this here you can see them coming off one of these racks on the back of a truck. You can get a whole house onto the back of a single truck or with a trailer, and the whole house can be assembled and you can have a watertight structure in one afternoon. There are other types of panels like SIPs or structurally insulated panels. There's lots of three-letter acronyms, of course, and I think of these like Eskimo pie sandwiches. So it's an oriented strand board, rigid insulation, and an oriented strand board panel. So it's structure and insulation fabric all in one. And there are New Zealand-made SIPs coming out of Cromwell from NZ SIPs at the moment. Now, I'm sure many folks would have heard of CLT. It's a little bit flavour of the moment. So cross-laminated timber is a really great way to use a low-use timber like Pinus radiata and to turn it into a high-value product. So it's essentially like a giant plywood where the pieces of lumber are set at 90 degrees to each other, and you can have as many layers as you need. This is an example of the backpackers in Christchurch, the Beeley backpackers, which again is a really great use for a student accommodation or a backpackers building. It's a very durable wall product, and this is how you can see it's just clad to look like any other building around. It's really beautiful when it's revealed. It's not always exposed, but there are fire treatments which allow it to be exposed. I think maybe the hallways it is exposed in there too. I'm sure you'll be familiar with this building, being part of the University of Auckland suite. So what was interesting with this site, of course, is it's really constrained, so there wasn't a lot of room to spread out in terms of traditional construction. We don't have a lot of examples in New Zealand of volumetric construction. Stanley Modular have done most of them. So they did this building. They also did a whole wing of the Chateau Tongariro in as early as 2005. So we have been doing these things for a while. So 468 of these bedsit volumes were made in Matamata and brought to site, where they were stacked, if you like, 3 high, and then an interstory floor was poured. And this was set up a bit like a chest of drawers, really. There was a traditional frame, and then the modules or volumes came in just like drawers. So it was a combination of traditional and prefabricated construction. Now, there are other non-structural pods out there, and these include bathroom pods. At the moment, we don't have a huge number of bathroom pods manufacturers, so if anyone wants to start a facility, I think Auckland's ripe for it. So Construction Components Limited is in Christchurch, and they have this line of Saponi bathroom pods, and you can see these coming in. These are typically in hotels and other residential multi-res type situations, accommodation. Now, the one that particularly appeals is the kind of pod and panel mixture, the hybrid, and the best example of this really is the First Light Studio project, which came out of the University of Wellington University, and they sent this to the Solid Decathlon competition several years ago, 2013. I'm sure folks here will know about Solid Decathlon. Yeah, so this was the first team from the Southern Hemisphere. I think the Aussies have got on board since then. But they came third out of 20 teams, which was great. All they had to do was make a house, package it up and send it to the States, assemble it in a week, display it through 10 competitions, and then pack it down and bring it back. So they did that, and they did that by putting it through 6 containers. There were volumes, and then there was an interstitial space that was panels, the dining space. I think what they did really well is they managed to kind of herd about 40 different industry sponsors. So they did a really good job, and they, of course, got Meridian on board at the end there. Oh, the other thing that was really interesting about that too is they had it on display on the Wellington foreshore, at Frank Kitts Park, and for over a 2-week period, about 40,000 people went through it. So there was a huge interest and long lines at lunchtime with people wanting to really experience and understand what a highly sustainable house felt like. That first typology, the complete building, is the classic kind of transportable house. And this one we like to think of as a bit of affordable architecture. It's a little bit of a baby between a couple of our board members, one being third generation Keith Hay Homes, who of course they make fabulous homes in terms of having a good manufacturing system. They're not always the most beautiful homes, which is why it's lucky they mixed with Andre Hodgkin from Architects, who traditionally does, very high-end houses generally. So together we got a hybrid, if you like, of affordable architecture. So this house on display, the Park Terrace in Christchurch, was available, I believe, for about $300,000. Other folks like Concision in Hawke's Bay and Hastings there have built facilities for which can fit the manufacture of about 12 or 14 small buildings, whether they're rural police stations or school classrooms or small houses. And of course there are the lovely architectural follies like the Atelier Workshop one, which was the Porter Batch, which is this refurbished container. So hopefully we'll see a bit more of those wee batchy solutions. So that's a quick snapshot of what's been happening locally. Of course, there's a huge another amount of what's going on in terms of medium density housing. You'll be familiar with the grounds, I hope, at Hobsonville Point, which is a medium density example, and we're seeing a lot more now with Housing New Zealand with cross-laminated timber. But just to quickly show you what's happening around the world, a few years ago there was an exhibition in New York called the Home Delivery Exhibition, and a really great book came out of that, which is probably in your library. So that's probably the most concise history of this space that I've seen. There are things like Dwell magazine and their show that they run every June, July in LA. So if you're in that area at that time, it's definitely worth seeing. They quite often have houses as part of that show. Out of China, of course, we're still captivated by the work of the Broad Group. Has anyone watched these videos on YouTube? Yeah, so like 30-storey buildings that go up in 15 days, and they've done a, I think, 80, 90-storey one, Sky City, mini Sky City. So you can have a look at the videos and things they've got on there. They're really fascinating panelised assembly. They do have a very large factory at the foot of these buildings, but the idea is that it can be transplanted around the world. Now, just like what have we said before around show housing? I've just forgotten, but what we can learn from Germany is they're very good at speaking directly to the consumer, and I think in New Zealand there's a lot we could learn with that. We don't often treat our consumers with a lot of knowledge, but in Germany they do, and as a result the consumers demand a highly sustainable product, to the point that their high-end houses even have demagnetised steel beams in them. So they really take it to the nth degree, which you can imagine. So there are these great show housing villages like this one in south of Munich called Bausentramm-Poing, and there's, as it says, 54 display houses. And these are amazing houses because all the walls are like 300 or 400 mils thick, and they use fabulous timber technology like blown-in insulation made of wood shavings and all sorts of sustainable methods. Everything's on display. Full sections of their construction system are available. Anybody can look at them, and it's a really great system. That top image on the left is Huff House. Did anyone see that original Grand Designs episode of the Huff House? The German Huff House? Yeah, and the two things that went wrong with a British crane driver going to the wrong address. Yeah. It's a really good episode. They say that whenever it's aired anywhere in the world, their phones just go nuts. Clearly a really interesting system. In Japan, they also are really good at talking to their consumers. They have identified that women are the target market, and so they angle all their research and development and information towards the women who are making those purchasing decisions. They have these R&D facilities, which is essentially the front end of the manufacture, where the house comes out the back. And you can see impact testing of facade materials, you can see fire testing of materials, you can experience different seismic resistance systems. They have base isolation foundation systems for just regular houses. It's phenomenal. People pay a 10% premium for a prefabricated house because they have found out that it's more highly tested and people are demanding the quality. They also come with 30-year warranties, and these warranties are kept live by having the company come back and do the tests or examine the house every year, and then the clients have to do those upgrade solutions or whatever it is they need to do, and that keeps the warranty live for this huge amount of time. And of course, being Japan, there's a lot of robotic manufacture. It's a lot influenced by car manufacture. There are, for example, Toyota homes, there are Panasonic homes, Sekisui homes, so companies that started off in chemicals, electronics, car production are now producing houses. They say there's 2,000 parts in a car, but 20,000 in a house. Every single house looks different. What you're looking at there is a very, I guess, European or North American influenced style, but a lot of them are 2 or 3 story kind of row houses or conjoined townhouses and things. And of course, they're great with their tech, integrated PV panels in the roof tiles, self-closing toilet seats, everything you could want. Now I've got a couple of slides about Sweden, and this first one's about their Million Homes program. So for those that don't know, in the mid-60s to mid-70s, the Swedish government acknowledged their critical housing shortage, and they set out to do the Million Homes program. So 10 times Kiwi build, with a population of 8 million people, so twice our population. So it's really 5 times the scale of what we're thinking of doing here. So whenever we have doubters around what we're trying to do with Kiwi Build, it's good to look at how things have been done in the past. Now, there's not a lot of imagery, but they did sometimes set up this kind of panelised concrete scenario. They had public transport routes in place first, but they also transformed the way they deliver traditional buildings. So as a result of that Million Homes program, they now, instead of components, pre-nail and roof trusses being standard, now closed-in panels are standard. So that's a really interesting lesson, I think, for New Zealand, and I would hope that we will come out of the Kiwi Build transformation with a kind of 10, 20, 30-year vision that we move into more panelised construction. And even the roof elements are coming to site fully finished. Yeah, so you end up with, well, what looks like a fairly standard house, or that might even be a duplex, and then it's just all watertight really quickly. And then you can take as many weeks as you like to fit out the interior. We just, with Prefab Oz, which is our kind of sister organisation in Australia, we did a little trip to North America last month, and just a couple of slides from that. This is the inside of the factory, OS factory in San Francisco. So this facility used to make nuclear submarines, and so it doesn't have a need anymore, so now they're making houses. So what's really interesting here is this is a fully manual facility. So usually when you go to these big factories, there's mechanised or automated equipment. What's really interesting here is they're doing everything by hand. So they're all hand jigs. So usually we might see the boxes or the units move on rollers. The way they move them in here is through these amazing pneumatic airbags. So they fill up underneath the units, and then you just need like 1 or 2 people to move them along to the next station. It's really fascinating. The other thing they thought that they did that was pretty interesting is you can see kind of midway through that photo where the floor cassette is raised up. So they work on both sides of a cassette at the same time. So you'll be lining the ceiling at the same time as you'll be laying the floor on top. And I think that's a trick from the mobile home industry, because we saw that at the next place. The other thing I thought was interesting about these folks is they're catering mainly to emergency housing, social housing, affordable housing, multi-unit projects. And when it comes to doing emergency housing projects, the whole material supply chain chips in with reduced margins. So as a result, they can produce a much more affordable housing product. Now, I'm not sure that that happens in New Zealand yet, but I thought that was a bit of a brilliant idea. Now, we then went to Tennessee. Has anyone been to Tennessee? Think, hot spicy chicken and stuff like that. A little bit Trump country, really interesting. So we went inside this Clayton Homes facility called True Homes. Now, for those that don't know, Clayton Homes is owned by Warren Buffett's group. It is ginormous, like multi-billion-dollar integrated finance companies through supply chain, through to housing. It's just blows your mind. So in this one factory in True Homes, 300 folks come to work every day and make 20 houses every day. And they're really heavily incentivised to make 20 houses because they'll get $12 an hour if they don't, and they'll get $22 an hour if they do. So these folks move like ants all over their structure. They are gluing their roof trusses to their ceiling panels. They have got this efficiency down to a T. We'd never seen anything like it. We just tried to stay out of their way. It was like a health and safety bomb about to explode. It was phenomenal. So these are chassis-based houses, what they call manufactured home industry, which used to be called mobile housing, which has been derogatorily referred to as trailer park housing. But they can produce a house like this for, well, not ex-factory, but once it reaches the customer, 100,000 New Zealand dollars, you can have a 70 square metre, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. So really interesting to see how they are addressing that affordable part of the market. Clearly that they've managed to separate the land and make that a leasehold situation as well. And I think also what's interesting is this, what you're looking at is they've got a double wide, oh no, you've just got a different roof form, but you can have a double wide unit as well. And of course you can have anything you want as long as it's beige. So they have one siding, like a couple of shutter colours, but that's it. Yeah, so really interesting. I'll just skip really quickly through this because you can find out about PrefabNZ by going to the website. But we have a directory, like I've said, so that's good. There's an events, so you can come along to those. Lots of downloadable resources. We had a really good media avalanche around our collab in March, and we also have this huge kind of mountain of resources that are all freely available. So the things that I think are useful if you're out there in the industry is the glossary, for example. There's a little bit of stuff around the roadmap, what we're trying to do. If you've got clients that want to understand what the potential savings are, then the value case is a useful one. It talks about the 15% cost savings. So all the stuff is downloadable on the website. The Hive was a demonstration village that we did post-Canterbury earthquakes, 2.5 years. We had 10 different houses up. We have tried to do something in Auckland and Wellington with medium density housing since, but we might be getting close to something. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So that was really interesting. There was quite a good mixture of timber, steel and concrete, components, panels and volumes. And again, people really love to touch and feel and experience and understand housing, so I think there's a really good role moving forward for us to showcase housing. We ran a little design competition a couple of years ago for a universal bathroom pod. This is now an open source pod, if you like, utility pod, bathroom on one side, kitchen on the other. The winners were the First Light Studio, the young folks from Wellington. We built a prototype that was displayed at AUT when we ran the collab there. Anyone can go in and use this. It's all freely available. And because our members complain to us once a year when we run our membership survey about the 3 things that keep them awake at night, they are procurement, so getting scale in your orders, consenting, of course that's keeping everyone awake, and bank finance. So we've done and are doing some continuing pieces of work on those areas. So if you're deeply interested, that stuff's in the project space. But this is the button I wanted to let you guys know about, which is what's leading to that potential next demonstration housing phase, and that's the Snug Design Competition. So you can find out about this on our projects page, but essentially we went into Auckland Council and said, hey, we can do 10 square metres without a building consent. In Holland, so one of our board members keeps telling us, you can do 30 square metres without building consent. So Auckland Council, where could we find some middle ground to do an experiment for some kind of backyard secondary house? So they agreed that we could do anything up to 65 square metres and that they would pre-consent some of our finalists. So we've launched the Snug A Home in My Backyard competition. The registrations were open for a couple of weeks and we had 162 teams sign up. And the teams have to have an architect or designer, a manufacturer or builder, and a student or apprentice. So it's really important that we wind in that skills aspect as we move forward. So the ultimate end point of this will be a dozen, like a pattern book, which will be in magazines and the supermarket come the end of the year, November. In September, during the Festival of Architecture, with the help of folks from University of Auckland, Unitec and Victoria Uni, we'll have some kind of doll's house or mailbox-sized models of the final 12, and hopefully that will help facilitate the public or people's choice voting side of it. But the whole idea here is that we can all be enabled through gentle density to create more homes close to home for our extended family, university students, independent living or older people, or Airbnb, extra income or office scenario. So this idea that there are some more solutions available to us that we could be taking advantage of. I won't go too deep into this because it's just really discouraging. We've been talking with the banks since 2014. One thing that has happened recently in May, Westpac said that they were bundling some bits of finance together so that people could get into transportable housing. For those that don't know, it's really hard to get a mortgage for something that's not fixed to your land. So if a transportable house is made in another site, then the bank needs another way to understand that risk. So whether that means financing the manufacturer directly or adding another layer of assurance that the client pays for, that's some things that we're exploring with 4 or 5 of the other big banks. It's really boring and it's really laborious, but we'll get there one day. In terms of capacity and capability, we did a report over summer which looked at how many houses can we produce. Because of course the naysayers are like, 10,000 houses, we'll never be able to do that. So we thought, well, how many can we do? And the research that we did showed that we could do 7,000 units a year in the prefabrication sector alone in the next 2 years through people saying that they will reinvest 8% of their turnover in the next couple of years. So we put that out in March. Since then, we have found out about definite investment in prefabrication facilities, either extending lines or adding another manufacturing line or building a whole new facility that makes it look like more like 10 or 11,000 units. So, and that's before counting any folks from offshore. So we also, in response to the consenting question, for those that don't know, it can take longer to get building consent than it can to build a house. So we're interested in reducing and streamlining the process for alternative solutions or ways to get people inspecting in their factory rather than at site. If you're producing many houses at scale, then clearly you need to be able to do some self-inspection. So there's lots of interesting stuff happening in that digital technology side with supporting building officials. It's happening just very slowly. So we put together this suite of solutions, a live document, if you like, and it's available in our member resources, and it will update. So there's currently not an agreed solution of how we deal with offshore, offsite. So Auckland has a draft policy that sits in there. MB has some guidance around when to use product compliance like CodeMark and when to use other pre-consent tools like multi-proof. There is some work happening within MB to get some more efficient consenting, which we are really crossing our fingers and toes for, and we need some clarification in some areas. So this material matrix is the PrefabNZ contribution to this Good Offsite Guide. I'm really happy to make this stuff available. It's currently in the members division, members resources, but if anyone wants to see it, let me know and I'll email it to you. But this is quite a good way to get started if you're wondering which material or which typology is right for which situation and which building code clauses are relevant. So it's a good kind of specifiers entry, if that makes sense. So just rounding up now, thank goodness, you say, a couple of slides on what's going on. So what we're seeing offshore, of course, is multi-storey timber buildings. Germany is good at this, and CLT has been used in Europe for about 50 years. We are seeing more CLT buildings in Australia, especially through folks like at Lend-Lease or Strong Build. We are getting some more close to home that I'll show you in a minute. That top image, of course, student work from here, University of Auckland, that was Yusuf Patel's work through EdFab. And so there's really interesting digital manufacture experimentation, and of course what's interesting with that situation is there was no fixings, so it's that kind of mallet and friction system. The 3D printing space is really dominated by Eastern Europe and China at the moment. I'm not sure what experiments are happening in New Zealand around seismicity for that, but I think that could be an interesting space. There's certainly interesting material experiments happening with 3D printing, and we got to see in San Francisco what's happening at Autodesk around printing with metals and things like that, but it's really similar to what's happening at Callaghan, so we're not so different, which is good. And those of you who are on the tools, you'll know that many designs start off looking like parametric models, and that these then feed into new ways of thinking about bringing buildings to site. So Makers of Architecture are a young crew out of Wellington, and they have, I guess, a disruptive business model where they are both architects, designers and makers. And to be fair, you know, that's what's happening in your studio too, isn't it, Dave, in your secret basement? So these folks, you know, really young crew in their 20s and early 30s, they went out and bought a CNC machine and rented a space. So they use CLT panels, and then they developed their own kind of cassette system, which integrates, you know, battens, insulation, wrap, and cladding. So they do everything right through to having their own construction folks to bring it to site. So that fully integrated solution is what we see at scale offshore, but it's really interesting to see that done at a micro scale here. So, and clearly, you know, beautiful aesthetics as well. Now this is the interesting kind of timber stuff happening. So Torwood is now an amalgamation between what was Torwood kind of design integrated studio with Stanley Modular, who have been doing this prefabrication stuff for 15 odd years. So it'll be really interesting to watch that space. So that includes that building I mentioned before, the Commons, which is a 3-storey walk-up. Sorry, the Grounds, which is that's that Nightingale thing. The Grounds, which is this 3-storey walk-up in Hobsonville. So this is at site now, so you could rock up and take a look from the outside anytime. The other thing that, of course, that's grabbed the media attention is Sir Bob Jones' own design of 9 stories of mass timber, so LVL and CLT. So Studio Pacific Architecture in Wellington is helping Bob with those finer construction details, and that will be, that's just at that kind of construction tendering, building consent stage at the moment. So we'll keep peeled. So just a little nod to, did anyone here go to the BuildNZ Design X event a couple of weeks ago? Cool. Okay, so that was really interesting. We did a little innovation quarter patch, if you like, showcasing the work of students. So there were some folks there from Unitec and Victoria, and showing digital fabrication, 3D printing, where there was a little robotic arm going, doing a miniature system of that X-frame. So that was all very cute. And what was really interesting is that there was a massive amount of interest in people and wondering, you know, what's this next evolution that's going to be coming up. And I think what's really heartening for the students in the room is that you folks will be our technology leaders. We won't be just paying you $20 an hour when you come out. We'll be wanting to grab the really good tech literate folks, and I imagine that you'll be really well positioned to lead and influence the industry as you come out of university. So I think it's a pretty exciting time for us to weigh up different value of knowledge. So last slide, pretty much. Just really in summary, you know, feel free to engage with the information if there's something you're looking for. If you can't find it, get in touch, obviously, info@. The Snug Home space is going to be a public engagement face, so that's snughome.nz. And yeah, if you can't, the directory is a good place to go to try and find stuff. And that's us. Cool.
Thanks very much, Pam. And nice to hear a shout out for the students at the end, because as you can see, we're makers of architecture who are recent grads,
Mm-hmm.
and it comes naturally to students. They are kind of like, that is the way they're building their models in our studios at the moment, in all the architecture schools. That's the way they'll be building buildings.
And I do have to give a shout out to, of course, to the Unitech Studio 19 program, which isn't going anymore. But and I don't have a slide on that, unfortunately, but I should do, because what we are missing out in a lot of instances in our architecture education is that hands on the tools. I mean, architects or architecture students really should make at scale. Yeah.
Okay, questions for Pamela? None.
It's all pretty overwhelming. There's a lot of information there. I'm sure you get people asking about what constructors in this country are really into this. Because at the end of the day, a customer needs to go to a constructor to get things to happen. Is that,
Sure.
is that
Yeah. So on our website, that map of New Zealand, the directory, there's a drop-down box. You can search by builder, architect, and like Google Maps, it'll just come up with all the folks who are doing it. But if you want to just know kind of the top 5, so there are folks like Concision, who you saw the inside as a panel factory, Tallwood, which is now the Stanley Modular JV. There are folks like ZCAP, who are coming on stream with a 40,000 square metre facility, but they have been building for a long time. There are other folks like the Donovan Group coming out of Northland, who are a little bit off the radar at the moment. And there's a huge number of folks, like even the kind of Keith Hay Homes type of buildings, who we are encouraging to get more into 2-storey or duplex, or to think beyond the detached house. We're certainly saying to our members, look, if you're not doing multi-unit or 2-storey, then you'll have to rethink how you're going to be applicable to Kiwi Build. Yeah.
And these places have all got factories or something?
Well, there's a mixture of controlled yard and undercover, and there are changes and things being built and expanded. I mean, you would have heard in the media how Fletcher Living are building a facility for their own use. Mike Greer Commercial building a facility. There are, the Concision has gone under full ownership of the Spanville Group, which means they will now be able to expand. So what we're seeing is a lot of industry saying they're going to move forward with their expansion plans, and at the same time we're talking with Kiwi Build and Housing NZ saying our members need multi-year, multi-hundreds of unit contracts. So we need 300 or 500 homes a year over many years, over a political cycle, into the next political cycle. So
And that's the whole economy of scale.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what's the point of them setting up? Because I imagine infrastructure costs are huge.
yeah, well, that Concision factory, there's 10 million of kit just in the machinery, but that's what makes something like Factory OS quite interesting. It's manual, but yeah, they invested, I'd have to check my notes, but maybe 100k US in that pneumatic airbag moving system. Yeah, so there's some investment there. It doesn't seem like investment is the scarcity. It's knuckling down the procurement.
And if we just go on a little bit more, I mean, those that go through architecture school, I don't know how much you know about construction these days, but
Never enough.
we're all used to 3604 and that mindset.
Yeah.
Where do people learn to design in this way, new technologies? Is it just the new generation coming through?
Employ more grads.
I'm kind of going on from that question. You've got this CLT process and the SIPS process.
Yep.
Is what part of the building code and what standards are they meeting?
So it's my understanding that they're all acceptable solutions.
They're all acceptable solutions?
Yeah, at the moment.
Pretty much.
Looking for Dave to knock.
Right.
If it's outside the code, you do
Right.
acceptable
Right.
solution, or at least an alternative solution.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, I'm 10%. And the other thing I'd say is that there are a number of established players who are that kind of dream team. So if you're wanting to get us started, you're best to make the most use of that embedded knowledge.
I would also just say
Yeah.
That we will work very closely with anyone who wants to develop details or new methods for prefabrication. So we have a series of, not a series, we have an engineering team, and we will work with you very, very closely to develop those specific solutions. So there are manufacturers who are there who can help with some of that specific.
Yeah, it's definitely a really exciting time. You know, there's some research and development, there's some embedded knowledge. Yeah.
A couple of, you've had patiently had your hand up.
It's a bit of a boring question, but
yeah.
I'm actually quite interested in that whole financing aspect.
Yes.
My limited experience with prefab is trying to get it through banks. So how do they do it in other countries where it seems to be more mainstream? How do the banks get around it there, and what is the
well, different banking systems. Yeah, well, different banking systems have different appetites for risk. We're in a particularly shut-down, risk-averse situation in terms of both consenting and banking at the moment. But what we are seeing is there are folks like in the UK, they have a system of this kind of external assurance, which is something we're investigating at the moment as well. So you might have someone who says, well, this is a CLT system, this is a SIP system, it meets these kind of check boxes. And then when you say to the bank, okay, my CLT's arrived, then someone says, oh yes, I verify that CLT, it conforms with that system, therefore release that money back. So it kind of looks like a third party assurance scheme.
Fantastic presentation, Pam, thank you. If you could wave a magic wand and make the government do something it's not already doing, what would it be?
All signs point to good things. I would say, and we're working on this, look very closely at internally what we can provide before thinking all the solutions lie elsewhere. But we are seeing good signals around understanding quality and sustainability benchmarks. You know, I'm sure we'll see Homestar 6 or 7 wound into Kiwi Build somehow, LifeMark wound in. You know, a lot of those advocacy groups are really going for gold in that space, and this government does want to see a higher quality type of home. Yeah, it's just that at the moment it looks like they want a single tick box solution, so we just need to wrap up the New Zealand top performers as a single tick box solution. GFC, glass, GRC, GRC. So what we saw in Sweden is a lot of the bathroom pods used GRC kind of single, like one single shower tray, but a whole bathroom room-sized shower tray, and sometimes they use that glass reinforced fibre to make the complete bathroom pod. So not the cheapest solution. Well, I mean, we have precast and prefabrication at a commercial scale is of course pretty standard. There's not as much innovation happening in that concrete and steel space as there is in the timber space at the moment. But it might be like skiing and snowboarding, we might be able to get them to up their game, get the new skis to come through.
On in New Zealand, because I've seen in some of the countries in Europe, they are 3D printing concrete.
Right.
Any material that you can mold.
Yeah, like little pedestrian bridges in the Netherlands and things like that. Yeah, we're not seeing 3D printing at that scale in New Zealand. Folks like Callaghan Innovation, which is the government's R&D arm, are doing small scale, metal type 3D printing, additive and subtractive printing. They have got some like room sized 3D printers, but haven't seen anything of a building scale. I think, the next I'm not sure how far people are going to push the 3D printing thing. I think some of the bits that aren't in that presentation that aren't yet visible, that we will see more change in is, you know, the use of blockchain and stuff. Like, how can we use those kinds of transparent exchange systems for the supply chain, for example? Because as soon as you talk to folks about trying to produce a manufacturing facility for more than 800 houses a year, then you're starting to talk about being constrained by logistics. And in fact, you'll have 3 times as many staff in the logistics, the material supply around the outside, as you'll have in the manufacturing floor, for example. So the game becomes about, how do I get things on and off trucks? How do I, you know, do that flow? And those large facilities we saw in the States had literally 3 days worth of materials, and it was just coming in continuously from their supply chain. And it's that kind of supply type management that I think will need quite a lot of work, because we're not really well known for being super organised. You can't just pop down to Bunnings and get a few nails. Yeah.
And the geography of New Zealand as well, long skinny country with lots of narrow roads, lots of hills, and committed channels between.
But that might be a nice opportunity at that university scale, is how can blockchain work with that logistics?
Probably got time for another question or two.
Just regards to when you're kind of lifting off walls and stuff off from trucks and stuff, if there's any minor changes or amendments to that particular set, does it need to be taken back to the factory, or does it avoid the warranty or anything in that case?
Look, I think reality is always different to what you set out. The whole idea with prefabrication is you're meant to have frozen the design before it's made, but I understand that even wonderful pre-nailed roof trusses and wall frames aren't always accurate when they come to site, and you have to remake some bits and pieces. So I guess there's always going to be a bit of human error. One of the things that I think is part of that missing puzzle in getting the accuracy correct is that unbelievably, you know, design software is not talking exactly to manufacturing software. So folks like Autodesk are working on that at the moment, and Project Frog are working on these things about how do you have a compatible digital software platform that goes from, you know, Revit into the manufacturing software that drives the machines, for example. Yeah. But yeah, you know, like any kind of prefabrication solution is not an add-on later on down the track. I mean, you've got to freeze this in really early. So it's a client education journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But another thing is, you know, we often talk about prefabricating the whole house, but the low-hanging fruit is to prefabricate the bathroom or the laundry or the kitchen, which is often where a lot of the money is and a lot of the time. And we walk into a showroom, we look at it, we pick a toilet and we pick this and we pick the tiles and we pick that. Why not walk in there and just pick that unit and bang, it's on site?
Yeah, that's certainly what you see in Japan when you walk into these R&D facilities. And I forgot to mention also that Brands has worked out that 35% of all our homes now contain prefabricated parts. So when you add up by value, the components, trusses, wall frames, door and window joinery, cabinetry, so all that pre-made parts make up a third of our buildings already. So we're really, the conversation here is how do we move along that typology, how do we move into more closed panels or even just single clad panels. Yeah.
One last question. I was very interested in hearing, was it the Snake Homes?
Yeah.
Because I've been here for 10 years, and we've now got grads who have gone out there and have coupled up and are looking at building something in the parents' backyard. And I think this housing crisis I don't call it a housing crisis, it's an accommodation crisis. And we won't solve it by building houses, we'll solve it by building a wide diversity of accommodation solutions for the wide diversity of population that we've got at the moment. So one thing that we don't have in this series that we will definitely have next year is something on the tiny house kind of area in the backyard. So we'll be talking about that and seeing what we can do. So, if we could just thank Pamela